Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good morning. It is Friday, March 12th, 5:30 in the morning here in Calgary, Alberta, and I'm just trying to wake up, having some coffee, bright and early here in the morning. And this is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. I'm just happy you can be here and join me. And we're talking about crisis. I found an article called Understanding Crisis, and I found it on the Child Welfare Information Gateway at www.childwelfare.gov. And it's a great article, Understanding Crisis, and it's you can find those articles on their publications actually when you go onto that website, and you can pull up all kinds of publications. They have thousands and thousands dealing with all kinds of issues regarding child abuse. Just everything to do with child abuse, and there's so many there. I just really encourage everybody to go take a look. There's lots of good information there. So yeah, I'm glad you could be here. We're going to continue on with this topic this morning, and maybe a little bit more next week, because I don't think we'll be able to finish it off. But all week we've been talking about crisis and what happens to families who experience crisis. You know, many people experience crisis in their life. There's so many events, life events that actually can trigger and cause a family to go into crisis. And so that's why I thought we'd take a look at it. Crisis actually surrounds child abuse, and so anyone who's been abused would know that there would be crisis in the home and experience crisis. And it's not something that just people who are abused experience. You know, many families, normal families, who get along and normally function well, you know, when there's a crisis, things happen and it can spiral downwards for a while, the family, right? So unless they get some help, and so that's why it's really important to learn that there is help out there, you know, and just to keep looking for that help and get help, because back in the old days there didn't used to be any help for people who were, you know, going through this type of stuff, and people just generally kept it locked behind closed doors, and nobody knew, and these families would suffer on in their own mess, and so nowadays there's people trained that can help us, you know, crisis workers who can come into the home and try to help people learn how to problem solve and get things fixed so that their families are functioning again. And I just think it's awesome. So yeah, this show is not professional. I don't have any professional counseling certificates or therapy certificates or anything like that. You know, I'm just a person who sits on Blog Talk Radio, just bringing information to people. And as I search out information for my studies, which is child rights and human rights and international community development, I'm also searching out my healing, and you know, I've gone through a lot of it and worked out so much of it, but I still am very interested in continuing on to understand what happened to me as a child and what happened to our family, because it was a mess. Our family was destroyed, and really so many families are. I witnessed it myself. I had lots of friends whose families were just destroyed by all kinds of abuse and problems, and so not only was just mine, but other people's too. And, you know, then now, just looking around, you can see that this is still going on. It probably will for some time until things change, right? So that's why I'm doing this show. And, you know, so listen at your own discretion, because the topics of abuse are very sensitive. And I think, you know, most people don't like talking about abuse. They don't like to hear about abuse. And it's no wonder. It's a horrible thing, abuse. You know, it's horrible. It's just a scourge and a plague upon society. But, you know, I dealt with it, and I've been dealing with it for at least cognitively 40 years now. And so I'm okay talking about it. But, you know, some people might find these subjects very sensitive. So make sure you listen at your own discretion. And if it bothers you and it's something that you know is just going to bother you, just turn the show off, because you won't be hurting my feelings at all. And if you're a young person, you know, make sure you have someone listen to this with you, because I believe in online safety, and I push for it because I push for child rights. So make sure you have someone listening with you so that they can actually tell you whether they think this show is good for you to listen to or not, and also to help you with questions that you might have. It's just so important. So we're going to get right into the article. I'm not going to go back and recover what we just did. Yesterday we were looking at all the different phases of a crisis, and now today we're looking at how the client feels during a crisis, so how a family member might feel during a crisis, right? A parent or even a child or anyone involved in the crisis in the home. And they said here, I'll just read right from the page, Howard and Libby Parad described the anxiety-ridden responses of people in crisis as including upsets in eating, sleeping, dreaming, feeling, thinking, and doing. They believed that the following 9 emotional reactions of people in crisis, as discovered by the Benjamin Rush Center for Problems of Living, can help professionals better understand and work with crisis. So there's bewilderment, which is experiencing new and unusual feelings. There's danger, feelings of tension, fear, and impending doom. They list confusion, which is the mind is muddled and not working well. There's impasse, feeling stuck, nothing works. Desperation, need to do something, but what? Lots of families desperate, apathy, why try? A lot of times my mom was very apathetic. She just was like, why bother? There's no point, right? Helplessness, need someone to help me. Urgency, need help right now. And discomfort, feeling miserable, restless, and unsettled. And those are the feelings that people have, and they might have during a crisis, right? So they go on to explain the psychological effects of crisis, and that's what we're going to look at today. There's disorganized thinking and preoccupation with insignificant activities, expression of hostility and emotional distancing, impulsiveness, dependence. We'll see how far we can get through here. And so I'll just start here with psychological effects of crisis. While differences in coping abilities, stress-producing situations, and timing of intervention make each crisis unique, individuals in crisis experience some common psychological effects that affect assessment and treatment. Forming a working relationship with the parents when responding to a crisis caused by child maltreatment or when dealing with parents in any other child-rearing crisis situation requires anticipation of these effects. Generally, crisis events produce problems in 6 broad areas as described below. Such problems are temporary, however, and not indicators of mental illness. A crisis is transient, as are the temporary responses of the family members. Anyone can have a crisis. Therefore, being in crisis is not synonymous with being mentally ill. So yeah, just because a family is experiencing crisis doesn't mean they are mentally ill. However, it could mean, I'm throwing this in, that there might be a family member who is having emotional problems or is mentally ill. And in my case, my dad was diagnosed borderline schizophrenic at the time the abuse happened to my brother, and that's why my parents were told, and my mom was actually diagnosed manic depressive, and so they told them, they said, you have to get counseling, you have to get help for yourselves and for your children, and or we're taking the kids, And my parents went to 2 counseling sessions and then moved out of the country. So they sold the house and packed us up in 2 vehicles, and off we went to Canada. And then we moved back down to the States, but I think that's what happened. We sort of got out from underneath the eye of the social workers, and they were my parents didn't want to get help, because of these issues. They had all kinds of issues, and that's why this article is really interesting to me, for sure. Disorganized thinking. People in crisis experience a disorganization in their thinking process. They may overlook or ignore important details and distinctions that occur in their environment, and may have trouble relating ideas, events, and actions to each other in logical fashion. They may jump from one idea to another in conversation so that communication is confusing and hard to follow. They may not notice or may have forgotten exactly what happened or who did what to whom. Important details may be overlooked in interpreting events, such as a client's giving extensive information about a house fire, but failing to tell that her brother had 3 previous charges of arson. Fears and wishes may be confused with reality, manifesting a general feeling of confusion. Some people in crisis develop one-track minds, repeating the same words, ideas, and behaviors which worked in the past, but are inappropriate in the current situation. And these people may seem unable to move on to new ideas, actions, or behavior necessary to solve the current crisis. And it's just because their thinking is disorganized, right? And preoccupation with insignificant activities. In an attempt to combat disorganized thought processes and anxiety, people in crisis tend to become very involved in insignificant or unimportant activities, such as worrying that someone will be overwhelmed with bad air by keeping a window open. At the peak of crisis, then, these individuals may need considerable help in focusing on important activities, such as implementing the steps for productively resolving the crisis. An expression of hostility and emotional distancing. Some people in crisis are so upset over their loss of control that they become hostile toward one another, toward anyone who intervenes in a situation. They resent their need for help, feeling both angry and vulnerable. Other crisis-ridden people react with extreme emotional distancing and passivity, seeming not to be emotionally involved in a situation or concerned with its outcome. For crisis workers, the issue is not how to give directives, but to point out the choices for handling the crisis and to reinforce the strengths. And that's probably so that people will learn how to problem solve themselves, right? If they can't go in and just solve everything, and then the people leave the family and leave the parents not being able to solve anything in the future, right, that comes up. So they do try, I guess, to help the family learn how to problem solve together, and that's important, right? So impulsiveness. While some people are immobilized in crisis situations, others are quite impulsive, taking immediate action in response to the crisis without considering the consequences of their action. Their failure to evaluate the appropriateness of their responses may provoke further crisis, thus making an already complex situation even more difficult to resolve. That's how my parents were. They were very hostile and angry about the fact that they even had these kind of issues come up in the family. And I remember that when I was really, really young and my parents were going to go bankrupt because, they had all these kids and my mom was always in the hospital and it was just crazy. They had to go bankrupt, and my dad was working and everything, but it was a one-income family, and there was not a whole lot of extra money, and I guess they had to go bankrupt. And I remember there was all this talk about the fact that they were going to go to jail and they were going to go to prison because they didn't know how to. They just were not living like in reality, and they didn't know how to get help, and so. That's the type of situation I grew up in. Everybody was paranoid and freaked out, and it was like, oh, we don't want anybody to know. And as soon as they went bankrupt, shortly after, we ended up moving to Canada, and that's another thing. Because of the crisis, my dad thought we'll just leave the country. I'll just pack us up and we'll move. And my mom was so upset about that because they sold their house. It was the only thing that they owned, and the neighbors had to come and give us all this furniture and everything. They took everything. In the bankruptcy, they took all of our furniture and everything. And so the neighbors kind of pitched in and gave us a bunch of their furniture. And then my parents, right after that, moved to Canada. And so it was one crisis moving on to another crisis, and it was just more abuse, more problems, more domestic violence. This sort of thing can happen in a family, and I know firsthand. And it's very hard on children. I know that, and it affected us all very differently. The next one is dependence, and we have about 2 minutes left, so I'm not going to start that. It's quite a long article. And then there's threat to identity and a summary, and then crisis intervention goals and steps. So we'll go over that next week. And, we have a couple minutes left, and I just think it's just so important to make sure we get the help that we need. I studied human rights and child rights, and we have a right to a good life, and if you weren't shown that as a child, growing up in an abusive home, nobody said, hey, you have rights, what I mean? It was the last thing that anybody would have told me. And I believe, very strongly in human rights, and child rights are human rights, right? That's why people say, well, what do child rights have to do with human rights? Well, everything, because children are human. Children have rights. They have the right to life. They have a right to a good life. They have the right to protection, provision, love. They have the right to play and enjoy their lives, and they have the right to live abuse-free. And so, as an adult, we have the same rights, right? We have the right to live a good life, and if you weren't shown that as a child, like myself, you have to really work at it to understand that you didn't deserve the treatment that you got. And that no one does. Who deserves abuse? Not one person on this planet. I'm sorry. And so, we have to work like 10 million times harder to get to a place where we can say we deserve a good life too. But how do we get it? If you weren't shown, how to cope and deal with things, and like myself, was just not shown any good examples on coping skills. So as an adult, I have a hard time coping. I wasn't shown any kind of problem-solving skills. So as an adult, I really have to work about 20 times harder than anybody else to problem solve. And so it's really hard on people. And I know so I just want you guys to know, if you're out there and you're suffering, you're not alone. And just to make sure you keep reaching out. That's the main thing, I think. Just keep that hope alive and realize that we can do it. But it takes a lot of work, so you have to be willing to put the time in, and it's not just going to happen. No one's going to come and set this good life down on your lap. That just doesn't happen. I found that out myself when I was 21. I was headed for death. I was doing a lot of drugs, and I was thinking I could kill myself, and my brother killed himself, and that woke me up. It was a big wake-up call, and I thought, no, I do want to live. I do want to try to fight for this good life, And it's taken me another 20 years to finally realize that I'm worth it, and I do count, I do matter, and I'm not going to hurt myself and end this life because I finally found my fight to live. And so that's what I would hope for everybody else, that you would just fight to live instead of fighting to die and fighting to hurt yourself. Fight to live. We deserve this good life. We deserve to have a good life. And, I just encourage everybody today. If you need something, get a hold of me on blogtalkradio.com. Send me a message. I'm on Facebook. I'm all over the place. Just give me, send me a message, and I look forward to hearing from you. And I just want you to hang in there because you're in my heart, and I just care so much about people, and I just wish you the best of everything. So have a great day, everybody. I'll be back on tonight, 9:30 p.m. Child abuse prevention and human rights abuse prevention is up to us, and 9:30 p.m. that's Mountain Standard Time. So take care, everybody. Make sure you just keep reaching out and get some help, okay? And we'll talk to you soon.